History is often written by the victors, but sometimes the truth refuses to be buried. Today, we uncover the story they tried to hide: Britain's secret, brutal war against African freedom in Kenya. After World War II, a wave of independence swept the globe, but for Kenya, the grip of British colonial rule only tightened. The most fertile lands, the White Highlands, had been stolen from the Kikuyu, Mbu, and Mero peoples and handed to white settlers. African farmers were transformed into low-paid laborers on land that was once theirs, forced to carry identification papers called the kipande, marking them like prisoners in their own home. Poverty and racial discrimination festered, and the call for justice from political groups like the Kenya African Union fell on deaf ears. When peaceful pleas were ignored, a new movement was born in the shadows. Around 1950, secret meetings began. Fighters took a sacred oath, a solemn vow of loyalty to their land and their people, ready to die for freedom. This was the birth of the Mau Mau. The British quickly branded them terrorists, but to the people, they were patriots. Their goal was simple, their slogan powerful: land and freedom. The spark that lit the flame came in October 1952. A senior pro-British chief was assassinated, sending a shock wave of panic through the colonial administration. Britain declared a state of emergency. What followed was not a police action. It was an all-out war against the Q people. British troops and settler militias launched a massive, brutal crackdown. Villages were torched, and thousands were arrested in a wave of collective punishment. The fight for freedom had begun, and the price would be paid in blood. Britain's response was overwhelming and ruthless. Over 50,000 troops were deployed to crush the rebellion. But this wasn't just a military campaign. It was a campaign of terror. The colonial government unleashed a horrifying array of tactics: mass arrests, public hangings to instill fear, and systematic torture. Central to this strategy was a vast network of detention camps, a system grimly referred to as the pipeline. Over 150 camps, with names like Ola, Langata, and Athi River, were established. These were not prisoner-of-war camps. They were concentration camps designed to break the human spirit. Detainees were subjected to unimaginable cruelty, severe beatings, forced labor, and horrific sexual violence. The goal was to rehabilitate suspected Mau Mau supporters through brutal indoctrination. These were Britain's gulags in Africa. The colonial government rounded up nearly the entire Kikuyu population, up to 1.5 million people, and forced them into barbed wire enclosures they called villages. Families were separated, movements were restricted, and life was controlled by loyalist guards. The official purpose was to cut off support for the forest fighters, but the real aim was to crush the Mau Mau spirit through starvation, humiliation, and terror. Thousands died from disease, malnutrition, and the relentless abuse they endured within these camps. This was a secret war, hidden from the world, waged against men, women, and children. The most infamous atrocity, the one that finally ripped the veil of secrecy, happened at Ola Camp in March 1959. In an act of extreme brutality, guards beat 11 detainees to death for refusing to perform forced labor. The British government initially tried to cover it up, absurdly claiming the men had died from drinking contaminated water. But the truth was too horrific to contain. The Ola massacre exposed the depravity of the camp system to the world and became a turning point in the conflict. While the population was being caged, The heart of the rebellion beat strong in the dense forests of the Aberdare Mountains and Mount Kenya. Mau Mau fighters, though often armed with little more than homemade rifles and spears, waged a brilliant and determined guerrilla war. Led by charismatic figures like General China and the legendary Dedan Kimathi, these forest armies launched daring raids on colonial targets, disrupting supply lines and proving that the will for freedom could not be extinguished. And let's not forget the unsung heroines of this struggle. Women were the backbone of the resistance. They risked their lives as spies, couriers, smuggling food and information, and even as fighters themselves. They sustained the rebellion, their courage a vital part of the fight for land and freedom. In October 1956, the British scored a major victory. They captured Dedan Kimathi, the most iconic and defiant leader of the Mau Mau. His image, clad in leopard skin, had become a powerful symbol of resistance. After a show trial, he was executed by hanging in February 1957. The colonial government hoped his death would break the rebellion. Instead, it created a martyr. Kimathi's execution marked the beginning of the end for large-scale fighting, but the resistance for independence was far from over. The Ola massacre and growing international condemnation put immense pressure on Britain. The myth of a benevolent empire was shattered. The moral cost of holding on to Kenya had become too high. In 1960, the state of emergency was finally lifted. Negotiations for independence, once unthinkable, began. And in 1963, a new flag was raised over a free Kenya. The nation's first leader was Jomo Kenyatta, a man the British had imprisoned for years, accusing him of being the mastermind behind the Mau Mau. For decades after independence, a wall of silence surrounded the horrors of the emergency. Britain engaged in a systematic cover-up, destroying thousands of documents in an operation codenamed Legacy to hide the extent of the atrocities. Survivors were silenced by fear and trauma. The story of the camps, the torture, and the massacres was largely erased from official history. But the truth has a way of rising. After a long and difficult legal battle, a group of elderly Kenyan survivors sued the British government. In 2013, in a historic moment, the UK government finally acknowledged the torture, expressed sincere regret, and agreed to pay compensation to over 5,000 victims. It was a partial victory, but a crucial one. The Mau Mau uprising was a watershed moment in the history of decolonization. It was one of the first major armed rebellions against British rule in Africa after World War II, and it sent a powerful message across the continent. Freedom could be won, even against a mighty empire. It exposed the brutal reality behind the propaganda of a civilized colonial mission. Today, the perception has finally shifted. The men and women of the Mau Mau are no longer seen through the colonial lens as terrorists. They are celebrated as freedom fighters, the heroes who sacrificed everything for Kenya's independence. Dedan Kimathi, once executed as a criminal, is now honored with a statue in the heart of Nairobi. They were called savages, but history remembers them as heroes. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a hidden chapter of history. If you found this story important, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. See you next time.